I've talked before about how much I want to go back to a sort of low fantasy, low magic style of role playing game. There's lots of options out there. There's low fantasy gaming for one. There's the Conan 2D20 role playing game. Or you could just modify something that exists like White Box or Basic Fantasy to be more low fantasy. But those are all still based on this core, well, not Conan, but they're largely still based on the original D&D rule set. So I was looking for something else. And I was looking at Cepheus because I was thinking, what if I want to play a sci-fi game at some point? And Cepheus is a very cool 2d6 iteration of the original Traveler. And then I found Sword of Cepheus. Sword of Cepheus could be the game that out Conan's Conan. It is low fantasy, it is low magic, magic is dangerous, and it's a really good pulp adventure game. So we're going to take a look at that. I'm Tristan, this is Heroes in Homebrew. Okay, Sword of Cepheus. 2d6, Sword and Sorcery role-playing. Is by Omer Golan Joel. I'm sorry if I screwed up your name. You can yell at me in the Facebook group. Richard Hazelwood and Josh Peters. It is based on the Cepheus engine, which recreates Traveler. They also have Cepheus Atom, which is sort of the post-apocalyptic Cepheus, and Barbaric, which is another sort of low fantasy game, but without the sort of character creation methods that are in this. There's also Supers, which is a superhero version of the game, all based on the 2d6. So basically how it works is you have your 2d6. It works for all your sort of challenged rolls. Like anything you need to do, you roll a 2d6. And you'll see down here, if it's routine, you need to get a 4 or more. Average is 6 or more. Difficult, 8 more. Very difficult, 10 more. And formidable, 12 plus. And it gives examples of what you're going to use those for. So, for example, the difficult is a little more difficult than average. You use that target number for combat. So instead of rolling to hit a armor class or something like that, you're rolling to get above 8. So you'll use either your archery skill or your melee combat skill, add that modifier to it, and if you get 8, you hit. If you get lower, then you don't. It is also modified by your difficulty modifier, which can be anything that might change what your result is. So if you're trying to climb a wall, maybe if you would have like a 6 difficulty or an 8 difficulty, as your target number to beat. But if it's slippery, maybe that's going to add a -1 to your roll or a -2 to your roll. However, whatever the game master decides. You have basic skill lists: is alchemy, animals, artifice, artillery, art, rulership, riding. All of these are baked into the career that you choose. Your languages, because this is very humanocentric, humans are the only race in this game unless you use the non-human characters supplement. Your languages are based on the game world you're playing in. So if it's a homebrew game world, your game master or you yourself, if you're the one running it, you might have different languages for the different areas of the world. Skill advancement is experience points, but it works a little bit differently. You don't go up in levels. You use your experience points to purchase skill levels, which will make your character better. It takes 2 experience points to be able to get to a 0 level in that skill, which means that you can use the skill without receiving a -2 to the roll if you use it. After that, it's 10 to raise it up to 1, 2, or 3, and then 20 to raise it to a 4th level, 30 to raise it to 5th level. And the way it works is that you'll get, say, 1 experience point per adventure. Sometimes 2 if there's extra good role-playing, stuff like that. But you can use the optional rule, which allows you to advance faster. You can get 1 XP per session, or every couple sessions, or what have you. It basically comes down to the group preference of how fast they want to move up. So the characteristics or attributes, kind of the same as what you see in a lot of the other role-playing games, especially OSR games. You have strength, dexterity, endurance, which is analogous to your constitution, intelligence, education, and social standing. And you roll 2d6 and assign them as you like, or you can roll 3d6, drop the lowest, or there's several different optional rules. If you roll a social of 11 or higher, then you get an aristocracy. You get a title of nobility. So depending on what the difference is, like after 11, you could be a knight, a baron, a marquis, count, duke, duchess, royalty, what have you. The modifiers for the characteristics, 0 2s, you get a -2, 3 to 5, you get a -1, 6 to 8, 0, and it goes up like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Chances are you're only going to get to something higher than 12, after gameplay, and you add your experience points to raise your characteristics. One interesting thing they do is the pseudo-hexadecimal digits, whereas you're writing. This works mostly for the creatures, but you can use it for your character as well. Anything after 10 is assigned a letter. So you can just write like 9, B, 7, D, something like that. It takes a little bit getting used to, and you kind of have to remember it. I prefer using the numbers, but I think it's just a matter of learning it. You can choose a background skill, or a background. You get 1 skill associated to that. So you could be a savage from the hinterlands. You could be raised in a rural village or a large city, and you choose one of these skills. You automatically start at a 1 with it. Character creation is where, like, this game is kind of like a mini game inside a game. If you're not familiar with Traveler or Cepheus, you can die during character creation. You take your character through several years of their career. It's usually in increments of 4 years up to a certain age. And if you roll poorly on some things, you can actually die. I'm not going to go through all the character creation, but I'll show you a little bit of it. So the way it starts is you choose your career, and there are several careers here to choose from. So the careers are Barbarian, should be your Conan, Commoner, Noble, Pirate, Priest, Rogue, Sailor, Scholar, Shaman, which is like a medicine man, a Soldier, a Sorcerer, which would be your magic user, a Vagabond, and that's it. There's several to choose from, and each gives its own bonuses and negatives. So let's take a look at the step-by-step of how you would do it. Let's roll back up here. All right, so you choose your career. So let's say we're choosing Barbarian. You have to roll to see if you can actually take that career. So you need a strength 7+ minimum. You need to roll your survival, which is a 7+. So you have to roll 2d6. If you get 7 over, you can get into that career. And then advancement is 6+. So you roll your career, try to enter a career by beating the qualification throw. If you succeed, begin the career. If you fail, you must choose either a Commoner, Noble, or Vagabond. Then you go to your basic training. You get a 0 in all of the service skills. So if we look at the Barbarian, you go to this list service. So you would get a 0 in animals, melee combat, archery, athletics, riding, and survival, which means that you could roll any of these skills during gameplay without getting a negative to your roll. Then you resolve your terms of service. You roll your survival throw. If you fail, you die. That's it. Theoretically, you could, work with your game master and say, well, we're not going to kill you right away, so just roll again, or we'll say you passed, whatever house rules you dream up. Then you roll once on any of the skill tables. You can only have a number of skills that are equal to your intelligence and education characteristics. So if you have a 7 in intelligence and a 9 in education, it means you can have a total of 16 skills. Or 16 skill modifier. After that, you roll your advancement throw to see if you've gained a level or a rank. So if you roll, your first one would be brave, that's where you're starting at, and then the next one you'd be at tribesman. Then you get your rank skills. If you're promoted, some ranks have skills associated with that rank. And then aging, you roll for your aging after 30 and up. So the older you are, it could alter your characteristics in some way. Then you roll on the events table. So the events table for the barbarian is you roll 2d6, mishap, civilized, spy, hard times, enslaved, life event, savior, travel, hero, treasure, benefactor, and it tells you what's gone on with this. So you're creating your backstory as you're creating your character. It's not you haven't just thought up your backstory for your character. It kind of gives you that sort of story hooks for your character. Then you roll to re-enlist. An optional roll, because if you don't get your roll to re-enlist, you're out of the career, and then you start playing at that age. An optional rule you can use is re-enlisting in a different career if you meet the qualification. And additional terms of service, you continue on until you muster out, which gives you money and rewards depending on what your rank is. And that's it. So character creation does take a little bit longer than your typical OSR game. I know like things like White Box and Basic Fantasy, a lot of them it's very, very fast. This takes a little bit more time. Like you kind of need to have a session 0 with all your players and go through character creation together. But it's a fun like get going game. Just the character creation itself is just a game. So let's move on here. There's also life events, which can happen depending on what you've rolled during your career. Sometimes it will take you to a life event, and you're going to roll on those tables and see what's happened to you. For example, life event in Hinterland here. If you roll a 5, the local noble takes interest in you for better or worse. Either gain an ally but lose a benefit roll, or gain an enemy and gain a benefit roll. So things like that. You can change the course of your life. Then when you muster out, you get gold and a weapon and some stuff. Depending on your class and your rank, it'll give you different things. You can get an enemy, a mount, a ship, a focus, things like that. You can incur an injury during character creation, which could be permanent. There's aging effects. Optional rule, survival at a cost. According to the above rules, a character that fails a survival throw dies. However, some merciful or cruel referees may allow the character to survive, albeit at the cost of serious injury. The character must throw on the mortal wounds table, see the combat chapter, with a total DM of +0, which is the difficulty modifier. After suffering their wounds, the character must leave their career. And then you can do it more quickly just by choosing a skill package based on what type of campaign or character you're playing. And it's nice because it has examples of character creation in here. It has examples of combat. It has examples of gameplay. And then after that, you can choose your traits. I think choose 1 or 2 traits. So you choose 1 trait for every 3 terms of your career that you serve. So if you serve 1 to 3 terms, you get 1 trait. If you serve 4 to 6, you get 2 traits, etc. And they're just little extra things that you can give to your character that'll make them a little bit better. Equipment list is largely the same. The game, it's the base game assumes only gold and silver is being used as the currency, but you can use the regular gold, silver, copper, and it has the conversion rates right here. Has your living expenses, like most, and then your adventuring equipment is largely the same as what you'd find in other games, although the list is a bit smaller than you might find in, say, like Basic Fantasy or like BX or something like that. You have your personal armor, hide and fur, leather, scale, chain, banded, plate. So the way armor works is when you're attacked, all your damage is your armor is going to soak an amount of damage that it gives for protection, and then the rest will go to you. Will go to your endurance. Vehicles and mounts, your weapons, your basic fantasy weapons. Has pitchfork in there, which is kind of fun. Ranged weapons, arbalest, longbow, shortbow, crossbow, sling. Artillery has ballista, catapult, a light and heavy catapult. You can have your hirelings here. It has their reactions for hirelings. It's largely all the same. And the nice thing is this game, you just basically only need a 2d6. If I'm not mistaken, even the weapons themselves, cause, but it's still d6, so it's 2d6, 3d6, 4d6. It varies, but you're still only rolling d6. So basically all you need at the table are d6. And you can hire mercenaries. You have your thugs, light infantry, heavy infantry, bowmen, crossbowmen. So you can build an army if you have enough gold, which is really cool. I mean, you can do that in the other games too, but this is kind of like makes it a bit more. It's more than just soldier. They're a bit more in depth. Your retainers and specialists got the costs for those. Okay, adventuring. So you have law and chaos. You can decide to play with those or not. It's good and evil in this world. You have just like most games, you have NPC reaction tables. You have your wilderness movement. I'm not a big fan of how they do movement in this. It's okay, but I kind of just like if I'm doing movement, I'm going with a hex map, and I'm just going to say you can travel this many hexes a day, and then modify it based on the terrain. So it says you can travel 30 kilometers a day on foot on open ground, which is a lot. As someone who has done a lot of hiking and a lot of like travel over land, 30 kilometers is pretty long. Like after that, you're exhausted. So I'm not a big fan of that. I prefer, for my gaming sessions, I prefer to have an 18 kilometer or 18 mile base. So like this is how far you can go. If I'm using 6 mile hexes, it's 3 hexes. If you decide to explore an entire hex just itself, then exploring that one hex is going to take the whole day. The rules for getting lost, your rations, foraging, hunting. Again, like a lot of this, if you don't like it, you can bring in your own rules for it from other games. It doesn't change that much, but as a complete rule set, it's pretty good. It has everything in there you need. Fatigue, rest, climbing, falling, swimming. I kind of like the swimming because it gives you negatives if you're depending on the armor you're wearing and how much equipment you're carrying. It has rules for dungeoneering. Again, the rules for dungeoneering are very vague, or not vague, but sparse. So it's something that you might want to pull in rules that you're used to using for that. It has diseases and poisons, which is pretty cool, like pneumonia, black death, viper venom, arsenic, sleep poison, like things that your characters might come into contact with on almost a regular basis. The effects of extreme temperature on you. So that kind of stuff is very cool. It's not stuff you see a lot of. Like poisons you'll see, but not so much how the diseases work. and things like that. It has seafaring rules as well for sailing, which is pretty cool because if you're like you want to run a pirate adventure for a couple of sessions, it's got the rules for that. It's got the rules for vehicular combat. And speaking of combat, like most games, you'll roll for surprise, then you roll for initiative, and then you start your combat round in descending initiative. You can have 2 actions per turn. Now, I've looked, and it doesn't say that it has to be 2 different actions. You get 2 actions. So presumably you could attack twice, or you can charge and attack. Or actually, I think charging takes both actions. No, it doesn't. I thought it looks like. You can inspire, you can move, you can overwatch, which is basically you're holding your action waiting for a certain moment of time. So you can use 2 of those actions in one turn. I think some of them do count as 2 actions. And then you roll to hit. So if you roll your 8 plus on the 2d6, you hit, you roll your damage. There's rules for dodging and parrying. If you're a particularly talented fighter or a swordsman, you can parry, and it count. You get I think it gives a DM to the attack roll. So like a DM -3 to melee attack rolls against you. It has rules for firing into melee combat if you're using your bow and you fire into a group of melee fighters. What happens if you miss? Is it going to hit one of your friends? Things like that. It has rules for the cover and what the damage, what the difficulty modifier is going to be to the attack if you're attacking someone behind cover, or someone's attacking you and you're behind cover. So the way you get damaged is it comes off of all your physical traits. First of all, damage is going to come off your endurance, and then either your strength or dexterity. Once your endurance goes down to 0, you have a minor wound, which means you suffer a DM -1 to all actions, but you can keep fighting. If 2 characteristics go down to 0, say your endurance and your strength, you're seriously wounded, and you have to roll an 8 plus, or you fall unconscious for 1d6 hours. Otherwise, you suffer a -2 to all skill and attack rolls until you're healed. And if all 3 go to 0, you die. Or you are mortally wounded, and then you have to roll on the mortal wounds and get healed. And even healing at that point can cause complications, because you have to roll on this. You could die. You could have significant internal damage. Radical measures are required, normal recovery. So depending on how you roll on that, it'll result in whether or not you die, or you're like lose an arm or something like that. Which is pretty cool. NPC monster morale, and then it has an example of combat. Vehicle combat, which I'm not going to go through, but the rules are pretty basic. What I like about this book is it's pretty clear. Like, there were some times where I had to reread areas, but it makes sense once you start going through it and putting things together. It makes a lot of sense. So sorcery. There are 6 circles of sorcery, and each circle gets progressively more difficult to cast. Anyone can cast spells, but they have to have the sorcery skills. If you don't have the sorcery skill, you suffer the -2 to your roll, which when you fail a spell roll, that's when things start going wrong. You can, like, casting magic in this is really dangerous. You have to be very good at it to be able to cast without a problem, without like things going wrong. In this game, if you roll 2 1s, it's an automatic failure. If you roll 2 6s, automatic success. So basically, like, if to equate it to other games, it's a 1 or a 20. So for the circles here, for these 6 circles, you can see for first circle, you have to roll a 7 or more. Second circle, 8. Third circle, 9. Fourth circle, 10. Fifth circle, 11. Sixth circle, 12. So if you're casting the most powerful kind of magic, it gets really difficult to cast. The other thing is there are 3 types of magic. You have white, gray, and black. Casting black magic is more dangerous than casting white magic. So your players need to be conscious of that. If they're casting a really powerful black magic spell, chances are that it could go really badly for them. If you get critical failures, a spell critically fails in one of the following cases. A sorcerer throws a natural 2 on the spellcasting throw. The sorcerer's effect. The effect is how much you have passed the target number or are below the target number. And sorcerer's effect in the spellcasting throw is a -4 or worse. And sorcerer's concentration is broken while casting a spell. In such a case, the spell fails automatically, and the sorcerer has wasted the spellcasting time, either a turn or longer for rituals. Additionally, the sorcerer must make another sorcery throw with the same throw difficulty and DMs of casting of the spell to avoid a mishap. On a mishap, throw on the spellcasting mishap table overleaf. This is you roll a D66, so one of the D6s is your 10s and one is your 1s. And these are all the different mishaps that can happen. Now, to avoid some of this, you can use talismans or foci, which means basically they're like magic items. So you can imbue a foci with a spell that you can use repeatedly, or a talisman you can use it once. So that's kind of cool too if you want to be like a really into magic. Then these are things that you can use to help your spell casting. So you have white, gray, and black magic. Sorcerers gain corruption points representing the blackening and corruption of their soul in various ways. Each time a sorcerer learns a black magic spell, they gain a number of corruption points equal to the spell's circle. Each time a sorcerer casts a black magic spell, they gain 1 corruption point. And each time a sorcerer uses a gray magic spell to coerce, deceive, or harm a lawful or neutral sentient being, they gain 1 corruption point. Casting gray magic spells on chaotic beings, i.e. undead, evil monsters, cultists, and so on, or neutral animals does not cause corruption. So depending on how you're using this magic, can corrupt you. And then there's a D66 corruption table, which you mutate. You can mutate because of casting. This is so cool. It really makes it so that you have to think about whether or not casting magic is even worth it. And it kind of makes the world feel like, okay, magic is really dangerous and a lot of people are going to be afraid of it, and you should really think twice about using it. I love the magic use in this. I think it's great. And here are all the spells. You have 6 circles of white spells, 6 circles of gray, and 6 circles of black. So you can choose, you can get spells from any of these circles, any of these types of magic, but how you use them is really up to you, and it's going to require a lot of thought on whether or not it's worth it. But the nice thing too is just because you cast magic doesn't mean you're squishy like a magic user. You could be a barbarian who casts magic if you really want to. So that's really cool. All right, we'll go through all these magic spells, and some of the magic spells will be familiar. A lot of them are pretty different than what people have seen before. So you have the monsters. You have the types, which are beasts, constructs, humanoids, outsiders, undead. And then subtypes, carnivores, herbivores, omnivores. These are really, I don't know that I really hold to these very much. It helps to kind of decide where you're going to put them. But, I mean, for the most part, I don't think it's not necessarily really important, but it does tell you a little bit about the creatures and what they're capable of. A lot of what you're not going to see in this is you're not going to see goblins, you're not going to see orcs, you're not going to see a lot of those high fantasy creatures. A lot of them are Megafauna, like giant ants, giant spiders, flying apes. Although there are some things like you have the assassin vine, the basilisk, black pudding. You have a lot of great cats, which are like large megafauna felines, giant centipedes. So like a lot of things that you would sort of equate to those pulp adventures that are in this. Dark mantles, which would be familiar to people. And you have like demons, but they're like you have some generic demons. It's not quite the same as you would see in typical fantasy games. A lot of dinosaurs, which is amazing. I love dinosaurs. The djinns, like the dragon. There's just dragon. That's all it is. There's no. It's not like 20 different types of dragon. It's just dragon. It is what it is. You have your elementals, elephants, carnivorous fish. So a lot of the creatures are very, sort of like real world, but fantasy versions. There's two different types of hydras. There's a hydra and the greater hydra, which is pretty cool. The greater hydra grows back its head, whereas the hydra does not. Giant leeches. That sounds brutal. You have your lich, Komodo dragons, lizard folk. I love seeing lizard folk. Those are always great things to throw into ruins and things. Mammoths. What I want to like, I want war mammoths. I want guys riding mammoths into big battles. I'm gonna do that. That's happening. And your giant rats, your rock, giant snakes, giant toad, treants, your vampires, and your killer whales. You don't see that a lot in games. And your zombies, your wraith, yellow mold. And then it goes on to you have your treasure tables and things like that. So overall, this is a game I'm definitely going to run. I have some people lined up for it. We're probably going to record it and stream it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. One thing I do wish that this had was a table of creatures based on terrain. It does tell you for each creature where you'll find them, but it doesn't have a random table of them for your exploration game, so that's something you got to do it yourself. It's not that big of a deal, but it's that extra piece of work that you have to do, which, I mean, like I've said before, I'm pretty lazy. I don't like having to do that stuff, but I'll do it for this game. So overall, Sword of Cepheus, I think, is definitely worth the price of admission if you're looking for a low fantasy game that is a bit different than what you might be used to, but it's still familiar in a lot of respects. Although I really like the D6 mechanic, like 2d6, and then like all you need is 6-sided dice for basically everything. I think that's amazing. It's definitely going to be one of my mainstays for low fantasy games. It makes sense, and the cool thing is that if you're playing Cepheus, then you can use this as well. If you're playing Cepheus and they land on a low tech world, you can use Sword of Cepheus to build that world, and like this is what's there. I think it's really cool. Another thing that I would like to see is more pre-made NPCs. There aren't any in here that are like just like your standard soldier or standard town guard or whatever. Like you kind of have to go through and create all those on your own if they're going to be necessary for like if you're going to have to do roles with them. If it's just a throwaway character, you don't have to do any of the work. But if you're going to have city guard that might have to fight your players, then you have to do the work and create that yourself. But that's not that big of a deal. I think with a few hours of prep, or like, prepping over the course of like several days or weeks before you start the campaign, I think after that you won't need any more. Just make your generic templates for these guys and you're off to the races. So that's it. I hope maybe if you were thinking about it or you wanted to know a little bit about Sword of Cepheus, that this might clear a couple of things up. Maybe not. We'll see. We're hoping in the month of May, probably late May, that we are going to actually put an actual play of Sword of Cepheus out there. I want it to be really like a really gritty pulp adventure game. So we'll see. See how that shakes out. It should be a lot of fun. I hope you all watch it. So that's it for me. Save a spot for me at your table.